Good evening. When people ask me about my early childhood and my birth, I tell them that I was born into a war zone. And the factioning fighters were my parents, my mother and father. There's an enormous age gap between them, 17 years. And when I arrived in the world, my mum was 21 and my father was 38. And they were in such different stages of their lives that they were ready to murder each other. And they were not gentle fighters. They threw cutlery and crockery, and they screamed. It was loud and angry. And one of my earliest memories is walking down the passage in my home, pulling up two long pajama pants, trying to avoid cutting myself on shards of glass. And I'm born on my sister's birthday. I'm 3 years junior to her. So I had somebody to commiserate with. My sister and I used to spend our time in our little bed together, crying, holding on to one another. And one particular evening, when we were just little girls, there was a huge fight going on in the house, and cups and saucers and glasses were being thrown. And my sister and I were holding on to each other crying. And she said something terribly important. She said, "I promise you I am never going to have children." And it sounded so important to me that I repeated it. She was my big sister after all. I said, "I promise you I'm never going to have children." And even though Monique, my sister, and I made that promise to one another, we didn't actually live like that. As we grew up, my mother had an obscure saying she used to tell us. She used to say, "It is a woman's duty to procreate." She told us that so often in our lives that it's stuck in my head like a broken record. It is a woman's duty to procreate. And when my sister was 23 years old, she got married and she dutifully procreated. And I have a beautiful niece and nephew. When I was 23 years old, I had perhaps one of my first serious romances with a man called Martin. And Martin was gorgeous, a medical doctor, very suave, and he was a terrible womanizer. And I believed that I would be the woman that would stop Martin from being a womanizer, and he would choose me to be his one and only. But I was not able to change the world. Somebody sent me in the middle of our romance a photograph of Martin in an uncompromising position with another woman, and I had to end the relationship. And very soon thereafter, a couple of days after ending the relationship, I was one day late on my period. And in those days I used to watch my calendar like a hawk. And one day late I was a little concerned. By 2 days late, I was at the clinic. And I said, "Doctor, please check this out." And the doctor did. And what he told me is, he called it a mass. There is a mass in your womb. At the moment, we don't know if it's a mass or if it's a potential baby. We could wait a few days and then we could see what happens. Or we could have what's called a D&C and flush you out right now. And I made that decision that very afternoon to have the D&C and flush the mass. And if ever I was going to have a baby in my lifetime, I guess that was it. I got married at 29, and my husband and I, for some reason, kids was just never on our agenda. We just didn't discuss it. We had other things going on. And my marriage lasted 5 years. A year after my divorce, I met Anthony. And without a doubt, Anthony is the love of my life. And within a few, possibly hours of meeting Anthony, he told me that he could not have children. The story was that when he was a baby, there was some operation on his testicles that had severed some cord and screwed with the sperm, and I didn't really know, but the doctors had told him that there was a very limited chance that he could have children. And he had been married before we had met, and he and his wife had not had children. But I didn't listen to that. because I like to change the world. So I listened to the bit that the doctor said there might be a small chance. And when Anthony used to make love to me and he used to come inside me, I used to suck up my pelvic muscles and try and pull that sperm into me and say, I'm fertile, I'll do this where his wife couldn't. And it wasn't because I was broody, and it wasn't because our relationship was missing a child, but I loved him so much, and I wanted to create something with him. I went to the pharmacy and got all kinds of chemicals to make myself more fertile, and did the suck up and the taking the pills, but indeed I never fell pregnant. And our relationship ended. When it did, I was in my early 40s. And the concept, or the kind of idea of having to meet somebody new and fall in love and do romance and have a kid, it just sounded like so incredibly daunting. And I remember very well one evening in my apartment in Cape Town, crying big tears, sobbing of my loss over Anthony, my loss that I did not fulfill my duty as a woman, my loss for not having children. And I cried that sob that is so powerful. And you know, sometimes when you're sobbing so hard, your sobbing turns to laughter. I'm sure we've all been there, and I was crying, and I do not have children. 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 And it was like an absolute wash that came over me, this complete sense of relief. Almost, I felt like a miracle that I'd arrived in my life when all around me my friends had kids and they were doing school runs and lunch boxes, and all I had was to take care of me. Probably in a way that I was never taken care of as a kid. And I had a great job, and I had money, and I had freedom, and I felt this absolute sense of relief and gratitude, and the sense of what an advantage that I do not have children. But things are only advantageous if you take advantage of them. And so a couple of years ago, together with some other circumstances of my life, I decided to uproot and sell all my shit and go out into the world and travel, because I don't have children, so I can. 2 years ago, I stopped having my period. The doctors at Clinica Alemana tell me that I'm far from menopause. But what I feel is that my body has remembered the promise that I once made my sister, and it's decided to give up shop now. Factory's closed. So I do not have children, and I feel rather privileged and lucky for that. And in closing, I would like to extend a message to my mother and to all mothers and all fathers. Please don't tell your daughters or your sons that it is their duty to procreate. It is their duty to think for themselves and to make their own decisions about what's good for them. And if people make decisions not to have children, that's a completely valid choice.
Words of wisdom there. Thank you very much, Michelle. And thanks everyone for being a great supportive audience. We're going to take a short break so everyone can fill up on drinks again. And we'll be back with more stories for the second half. So give it up for all of the storytellers of the first half, please.